Greetings, drowsy spirit. Tonight, I will be your storyteller, assisting you in falling asleep soundly and deeply. Remember to subscribe and like the video before we start for more bedtime stories. Tell me where you are watching and what time it is in the comments. I would also love to know what story you would want to hear next. Sometimes I still think about that summer, the cheap fragrance in the car vents, the scent of scorching asphalt rising through the open windows, and the sense of invulnerability that only comes with being 18 and foolish. Returning, I believed that life was finally beginning at that point. The world seemed open after graduation. I had barely passed classes I didn't care about throughout the most of high school. However, I managed to earn a diploma. Cal, my closest friend, wasn't like me. He was one of those persons that picked things up quickly. Charm, girls, grades, everything. He had been my finest pal when we were 5 years old. It was an easy strategy. We would travel by car from our little village of Pine Hollow, Arizona, to Las Vegas after graduation. Since our freshman year, we had been discussing it, chasing neon lights, and making poor choices. 2 children take the open road. The issue was that neither of us owned a good vehicle. On graduation day, that was altered. A gleaming dark blue Mustang convertible was a surprise gift from my parents. I can still picture my mom sobbing as if I were leaving for battle, my dad grinning beneath his ball cap, and the light reflecting off the hood. My father threw the keys to me and said, "Son, don't use it in a foolish way." I chuckled, but on the inside, I could already see Cal riding shotgun in that Mustang as it tore down the highway. I was honest with my father when he inquired about my summer plans. He chewed the inside of his cheek, like he always did when he was pondering, and remained silent for a minute. He then gave a nod. "The 2 of you are going to separate universities. Do you want to release some tension? Proceed. However, you maintain your composure. Do you hear me?" I must have said gratitude 12 times. I gave Cal a call that evening. I was so excited I could hardly breathe when I said, "Dude, yes," said my elderly dad. "Vegas is on," he yelled over the phone. "No underscore way, dude. This is what we're doing." He already got his mother's blessing. That should come as no surprise. She has allowed him to get away with almost everything since his father abandoned him when he was 12. She even pretended to give him $500 for graduation. Wasn't used for gambling. By Monday morning, we had the car loaded, clothes, snacks, a radar detector, and an early 2000s bad rock soundtrack. Before the sun rose, we departed. We drove really, incredibly quickly. We drove the majority of the way down the interstate at over 100 miles per hour, while Cal had the radar detector suctioned to the windshield like it was our guardian angel. The desert passed by in brown and gold stripes as the wind blasted through the vehicle. Occasionally, Cal would shout, "We're legendary." Man, these days, no one engages in such activities. Yeah, I chuckled. Because people don't want to die at 18. He merely grinned. That's what makes it fun. In just 7 hours, we were in Vegas in record time. We headed to the casinos as soon as we got into an inexpensive motel off the strip. The next several days were a flurry of lights, alcohol, and short-lived bad luck. We had run out of money at the end of the week. I mean, completely broke. Everything I had worked for over the course of 4 years, working weekend shifts at the gas station, was gone, including my savings. Strangely, though, I didn't give a damn. Before the drive home, I had never laughed so much in my life. At that point, everything went horribly wrong. We had returned halfway till we observed him someplace outside of Flagstaff, in Pine Hollow. With his thumb extended, a man stood off the shoulder. An unclean army jacket dangled from his body. "Keep going," I replied. Cal, however, decelerated. "What are you doing, man?" I said, looking at myself in the mirror. He smiled. "Calm down. All I want is to enjoy myself, fun." He stopped the car approximately 20 feet ahead of the man before I could say anything further. The hitchhiker's face brightened as if he had just been saved, and he began to jog toward us. As soon as he was within arm's reach, Cal turned on the gas, causing the Mustang to fishtail and throw rocks and dirt in the man's face. Jesus, Cal. I turned in my chair and yelled, waving his arms. The man had staggered back. Cal almost lost control of the vehicle because he was laughing so much. You ought to have seen his face. It's not amusing. Man, hurry up. It's merely a joke. Yeah, well, you almost hit him. Still grinning, he shrugged. He's all right. The guy most likely deserved it. Jaw tight. I gazed out the window without uttering a word. That should have been the end of that moment. Yet it continued. The gas light turned on after we had been traveling for around 10 minutes. You got to be kidding me, I whispered. On a desolate section of Route 89, Cal stopped into a dirty Chevron station. While I went inside to pay, he began pumping gas. In an attempt to get rid of the bad sensation in my stomach, I reached for a bag of jerky and a few Mountain Dews. The elderly man with tan skin who worked as the cashier nodded. You boys headed south? Yes. I'm just passing through. Be mindful of your speed when driving. Since the weekend, there have been a lot of cops. I paid, nodded, and left again. I saw him at that moment. He was walking down the street with the same limp and jacket. The hitchhiker was sprinting in the direction of the station. Cal, I pointed and yelled. That's him. Cal peered out the car window. No way. It's the same guy. Yes, dude. Come on. Cal merely sat there smiling, rather than pressing the gas. I told you not to. And whined. He won't take any action. The man was now closer, perhaps 50 yards distant, and I couldn't make out what he was yelling. Go, Cal. Despite revving the engine, he remained motionless. I simply want to watch what he does. You think that's funny? Cal, yelled the hitchhiker as he started to run. I shouted one more. Then he reached inside the back of his jeans for something. The sunlight caught it. A firearm. Holy, go. I let out a yell. Cal's expression changed pale. The first bullet burst through the air, and he punched the gas. Behind us, glass burst. There was a metallic clang as another round struck the back panel. In an attempt to regain control, Cal was swerving all over the road. Keep it straight, I yelled. Jesus Christ, he's shooting at us. No, shut. With 90 tires spraying gravel, we took off from that station. It was ringing in my ears. My heart was attempting to break free from my chest. We were silent for kilometers. The wind whipping through the bullet hole in the rear window was the only sound. The excitement had subsided by the time we arrived at the edge of Pine Hollow, leaving nothing but silence. My jaw was clenched so tightly that my teeth ached as I continued to stare out the window. Cal attempted to speak at last. Don't, dude. Come on. I didn't intend for that to occur. I looked over at him. Do you believe this to be a joke? There are numerous bullet holes in my automobile. You wish to dismiss the possibility that we might have died as insignificant. He shook his head and moaned. You're exaggerating. That resolved the issue. Overreacting. Cal, you really are a psychopath. You got us shot at after you made fun of a guy. His hands clenched around the steering wheel as he averted his gaze. Man, whatever. All I wanted to do was lighten the atmosphere. Yes, congratulations. Then, you just put an end to it. For the remainder of the drive, we didn't speak. He laughed half-heartedly when I pulled up to his house. I suppose one day we'll have a nice tale to share. You know, I avoided even glancing at him. Leave. He hesitated, perhaps thinking that I would laugh or forgive him as usual, but I didn't. He proceeded up the driveway after opening the door and muttering something to himself. I didn't see him again after that. I told my dad everything when I got home. His jaw moved as it did when he was angry, but he tried not to show it as he listened. You're lucky to be alive, he finally remarked. I am aware that you continue to hang out with that boy. I gave a head shake. No more. Excellent. Some folks wait until it's too late to learn. I had to wait 3 months to get the car fixed. I completed it on my own, just so I could look at it and remember how much it cost me every panel, every ding. After that, Cal made several attempts to call. I allowed it to ring. Come on, man, he once said in a voicemail. It has been months. It wasn't my intention. I take it that we are brothers. However, I was unable to accomplish it. I had undergone a transformation. In that instant, I had witnessed his true self, someone who found cruelty amusing and who didn't give a damn as long as it made him laugh. You can't unsee that aspect of someone once you've seen it. It has now been more than 10 years. Occasionally, when I'm driving by myself late at night and the highway stretches out in front of, when I think back on that day, I remember the heat, the sound of gunfire, and the combination of horror and incredulity. I also understand that it was more than just a road trip. It served as a warning. If you pay attention, people will reveal who they are, even if they don't always tell you. And sometimes all it takes to see all you were blind to is a single moment. Too earlier. To see all you were blind to is a single moment. Too earlier. You could never call me a good man. Hell, I wasn't even a nice person for the majority of my existence. There weren't many positive role models when I was growing up on the south side of Leach, Texas. My mom worked extra shifts at a diner to keep food on the table, and my old dad ran left when I was 8 years old. Early on, I saw that the wealthy folks with fancy automobiles, bulky gold necklaces, and brand new sneakers weren't making their money the right way. I had been arrested twice by the time I was 15. One for robbing a pawn shop, another for enhancing a vehicle. I learned more quickly on the streets than in school. I used to believe that being tough meant never giving up. In actuality, though, it meant never knowing when to give up. I'm Ray Holton, and I don't enjoy sharing this tale, but occasionally I feel something stirring inside of me. Some things are too real to be hidden. According to that little whisper, I was incarcerated at Midland County Correctional for 3 years. It was a hot, dusty place full with men who had stopped trying to act like they weren't broken. Even though I had done time before, there was something about this location that felt different. Perhaps it was because I was 37 years old at the time, or perhaps I was finally sick of acting as though I didn't mind being imprisoned. I had a new cellmate when I was transferred from county to state. He was a large, heavy-set man who appeared to be in his mid-40s. He had a thick black beard that gave the impression that he had been chiseled out of rough stone. For the first few days, he hardly said anything. When I entered, he simply nodded, gestured to the bottom bunk, and resumed sharpening a pencil on the edge of his shoe. I quickly discovered that I shouldn't ask too many questions. Curiosity can be fatal in prison, but I will always remember the third night. An hour ago, the lights had gone out. The block was quieter than normal, the kind of quiet that only occurs following a lockdown. Everyone was tense because someone had been shanked in the yard earlier. The first time I heard Stephen King's voice was while I was lying on my bunk reading a battered Stephen King book, low and grating, like the sound of a tire rolling over loose dirt. Man, what did they get you for? I glanced up at his bunk's underbelly. Meth cooking. The judge didn't care that it wasn't even mine. A pause occurred. Then he moved, and his mattress squeaked. All right, I would have cut your throat by now if you were in here for touching children. I didn't even recoil. In settings like these, you hear that a lot. However, the air felt dense because of how composedly he spoke it. I muttered, "Not my thing." He gave a grunt. "Excellent." Then there was stillness once more. I assumed that was all. However, his voice returned a few minutes later, rough, almost contemplative. "Ray, have you ever killed a man?" My body went cold. "I can't claim to have." He exhaled slowly. "I've done it a few times, but only once did it have any significance." I didn't answer. I was aware of this. However, I sensed a twist inside, a sinister curiosity that tore at my throat. There was a long pause before he spoke. It was 74. I was a stupid 16-year-old attempting to travel to Santa Fe. After my elderly mother threw me out, my elderly father, who lived close to Los Cruces, offered to take me in if I could find my way there. 4 days, I was hitching. No one would stop. The sun was scorching me. My feet were scorched, and I was starving. He cleared his throat and stopped. Then this vintage Ford pickup stopped. "Beat up that green thing. There's rust everywhere, but it's still going strong." The elderly driver, wearing a plaid shirt, thick glasses, and a white beard, identified himself as Mr. Calloway. When I informed him was going to New Mexico. He gave me a very kind smile and said he could drive me all the way to the state boundary. As he spoke, I could hear him scratching his beard as if he was reliving it in his mind. We talked about nothing for a few kilometers, including music, the weather, and my hometown. You know, he seemed normal. He even offered me half of a foil-wrapped sandwich. I felt fortunate, but then he began acting strangely. I cocked my head a little. Strange in what way? He bent over so I could see his icy, glassy eyes in the low light. He continued to gaze at my legs, claimed that for a young man I had a robust frame, asked whether I had ever modeled. He touched my thigh after I dismissed it with a laugh. I froze. I had no idea what to do. If I assisted him, he promised to drive me all the way to Santa Fe. Claimed it wouldn't take very long. My gut churned. Did you not? Absolutely not. He interrupted me, instructed him to stop. Yes, he did. I therefore believed that he would let me out. Rather, he takes me, unlocks the doors, begins to unzip his fucking jeans. His fists were clenched. Back then, I had a buck knife with me. Small gift from my grandfather. I gave him a single neck stab. He let out a yell. I repeatedly stabbed him till he stopped moving. It felt like a smaller cell. My skin prickled all of a sudden. Man, Jesus, he disregarded me. After dragging his body to the passenger side, I drove down this dirt road for a mile. A dry brook was seen from a bluff. His head burst open, a melon on the rocks below, as I shoved him over. After that, I drove his truck back to the highway, went for a few miles on foot, and thumbs up another ride as if nothing had occurred. Ket spoke, if he were discussing how to replace a flat tire. Just facts, no feelings. Never told nobody that before, he said after a protracted pause. I had trouble falling asleep after that night. My heart raced with every sound, cough, and footstep in the corridor. He returned to being silent most of the time, if nothing had happened. But occasionally, I could see it in his eyes. He seemed to be reliving it with this haunting, far-off gaze. I overheard a guard mumbling his name during chow a week later. Royce Carter stated that he was serving time for both illegal firearm possession and violent assault. I wasn't comfortable with that. Why wasn't he inside for murder that evening if what he'd told me was accurate? That old man you told me about, they ever find him? I asked him directly. He grinned. My skin crawled at this slow, crooked smile. He was the kind of man who no one ever looked for. People like that are always vanishing. No one cares. All he did was flip over. Months went by. I took my time and kept my head down. However, Royce began acting strangely, mumbling things like, "Don't touch me," while he slept. "Never touch me again." Then they arrived one morning to relocate him. Stated that he was being moved to an El Paso facility. He stood at the bars and stared at me before he went. "Ray, have you ever hitched a ride?" I gave a head shake. "Excellent. Avoid doing so." He never spoke to me again after that. 6 years later, I was performing maintenance at a truck stop off Highway 25 close to Paz. Life was quiet, but dull. I would stop using, stop thieving, and even earn my GED. After a year or so, a storm passed through one evening. The ground was shaken by thunder and heavy rain. About 1 a.m. this vintage green Ford pickup arrived. When I saw it, my breath caught. The type Royce had described was rusted. The driver's window rolled down. The man inside had a plaid shirt, a thick white beard, and appeared to be in his mid-60s. He grinned. "Hi, my son. Do you have a paid phone here?" Trying not to show how uncomfortable I was, I gestured toward the store entrance, indoors near the restrooms. He thanked me, bowed, and entered. He still hadn't emerged 15 minutes later. I entered to make sure. It was deserted. The receiver was dangling from the payphone. Then I saw that the floor had something wet on it, drops that lead to the bathroom. With a creak, the door opened. Inside, I observed muddy footsteps, a lone buck knife at the sink, and a little barefoot. The blade was darkly discolored. I froze. The mirror over the sink has a punch-like crack in the middle of it. Then I heard it through the open window above the urinal. The engine of a truck is starting. Green Ford had just pulled back onto the highway when I dashed outside. After a single flicker, the taillights vanished into the storm. After that, I couldn't sleep 4 days. I even reported what I had observed to the police over the phone, but they found nothing, claimed that the storm had caused the security cameras to brief out. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence. 4 years, just another vintage Ford, just one more stranger. However, I know better in my heart because I received a letter 2 weeks later. Just my name in precise, thoughtful calligraphy, with no return address. There was just one sentence within. I appreciate you keeping your mouth shut at the time. A picture, a cliff, a gravel road, and a human skull partly buried in the sand were taped beneath it. That evening, I set that letter on fire. The following morning, I quit my job. I no longer drive on highways. That route still winds through the desert somewhere between Locks and Santa Fe. I'm not sure if Royce Carter is still alive, but occasionally, I believe I hear a truck idling outside my window when I'm having trouble falling asleep, and I always see that green Ford when I close my eyes, as it waits for its next ride. Its headlights shine through rain there. My father thought that July was the ideal season for what he called a true family adventure when I was 12 years old. The year was 2003. Back then, we were still residing in Tucson. Carl and Denise, my parents, and my younger sister Abby, they had been at odds for some time. However, I didn't grasp the significance of debates over bills and accountability when I was younger. All I knew was that Dad was making a lot of effort to put things right. This journey was his most recent endeavor. He explained that we will travel from Arizona all the way up through Idaho, stopping along the way to discover some hidden treasures. There are a few national parks, ghost towns, and small town eateries. He had been reading one of those old road trip guides from the 1990s that you could find tucked under the front seat of a used car. Mom referred to it as his Bible. That morning, while putting food in a cooler, she had said, "Carl, we might just take a plane to a typical location, like San Diego. Why must we travel 100 kilometers on dirt?" Dad chewed into his toast and just smiled. "The best things in life don't come with a return ticket, Denise." He frequently said things like that, half underscore and half wisdom at the time. Abby was just 8 years old. She carried a plush dolphin. He'd sprinkles with her everywhere she went. She was petite and gregarious. As our station wagon rumbled along the I-15, she squeezed herself into the back seat next to me and hummed tunes from a Disney CD. The vehicle, an ancient forest green Ford Country Squire with forward panels and an air conditioner that only functioned when it wanted to, wasn't very nice. However, it had a similar scent to us: road dust, gum wrappers, and traces of my mother's cherry lotion. Dad intended to travel to a location known by the second day. Blue Elk Ranch was in Wyoming. He referred to it as an old-fashioned guy ranch rather than a tourist trap. Horses, campfires, open fields, it would benefit us, he replied. He would say, "Good to get the city out of our lungs," to anyone who would listen. The drive proceeded smoothly for the first half. Mom, still wearing her sunglasses, fell asleep. Abby drew sketches of the horses. She promised to ride as I played on my Game Boy till the batteries ran out. However, the atmosphere shifted beyond Price, Utah. The roadways constricted into 2 fractured lanes, the kind that had been neglected for years. The world fell silent. We were alone with the road and a red-orange rock horizon that resembled something from Mars. Mom responded, "Hey, Carl," as she looked up from her magazine. "Perhaps we ought to quit right away. Since lunch, you have been behind the wheel." Dad gave a shrug. "About 15 miles up is a rest stop. There, we'll take a rest." It never felt more than 15 miles. Sheets of dust were blown over the highway by the increasing wind. Everything turned orange and gold as the sun sank. "It looks like the world's on fire," Abby whispered as she put her face against the window. I recall grinning at that, in a way that only a child could express. It was poetry. The vehicle then abruptly jerked to the right. It was a piercing sound, like a gunshot muffled by gravel and rubber. "Damn it," Dad said. With the tires gone, he snarled and gripped the wheel. We coasted to the shoulder, which was only a thin strip of gravel between a rusted barbed wire fence and the road. By that empty desert, everybody stay put, Dad remarked as he opened his door. As soon as he went outside, I felt the heat. Above the hood, I could see it shine. Abby peered over me to see him talking to himself while kneeling next to the back tire. Great, just great, Mom murmured. Carl, we're in the middle of nothing. Unwind. From behind the car, he muttered. I got the spare. For a moment, the only sounds were the low hum of the highway breeze and the clicking of metal tools. Abby then pulled at my sleeve. Can I go assist my father? Mom was massaging her temples. No, sweetheart, simply remain indoors. However, Abby had that expression on her face when she was desperate enough to disobey the rules. Before her mother could stop her, she unbuckled and slid out while holding Sprinkles under her arm. Mom screamed, Abby, return to this area. Dad raised his head. He shaded his eyes. Denise, don't worry. Give me the lug nuts, please. She will feel useful. Mom moaned but remained silent. Observing them, I leaned over the seat. Abby's golden hair was blowing in the breeze as she knelt next to her father. Her incessant questioning persisted, originating from children. Dad continued to smile and be as patient as he always was with her. Then he indicated something close to the boundary of the fence. He said, Go toss that rock for me, pumpkin, as I heard. Laughing, she bolted for it. I never saw her alive again after that. My mouth was filled with glass and blood when I woke up. I believed the world was crumbling because my head was ringing so loudly that the windshield was broken. Mom leaned her head forward. Her scalp was dripping with blood. I was immobile for a few seconds. It was all blurry. The muffled screaming outside, the stench of burning rubber, and the smoke from the airbags. Then I heard Dad shouting, Abby, Abby. I pushed open my door, and staggered out. Our car's front end was smashed. The shoulder was forced about halfway off by the back. Across the street, a black pickup truck with a smouldering hood sat diagonally. With trembling hands, Dad was on his knees. He kept whispering, Where is she? Where on earth is she? As I followed his eyes, I noticed the plush dolphin and Sprinkles beside the fence. Just beyond it was a path of blood. According to the paramedics, she didn't suffer and died instantaneously after being thrown several yards by the hit. In any case, it is what they told us. Until they forced her, Mom wouldn't let go of her hand. I recall listening to the police radio static while standing next to the ambulance and watching the sun set over the desert. The man didn't survive in the pickup truck either. He had consumed alcohol. They said that when he struck us, he must have strayed over the middle line. Everything became hazy after that. The beige hallways of the Grand Junction Hospital, the smell of antiseptic, and the sound of my mother's sobbing reverberating through each room. Dad was silent for weeks. As soon as he eventually did, it was to inform the officer that the trucker was at fault for allowing Abby outside, not the other way around. For that, Mom was unable to forgive him. Perhaps that's why she left a year later, moved to her sister's home in Denver. With what little we had left, I remained with my father. After that day, he was never the same. The man who used to crack cheesy jokes at gas stations hardly spoke these days. He stopped being a father, stopped laughing, and stopped shaving. He would occasionally be sitting in the garage late at night, gazing at the dented hubcap he had saved from the collision. It reminded him to exercise caution, he claimed. However, I was aware that it was punishment. He had begun going on road excursions by himself by the time I was 17. He claimed that driving improved his ability to think. He would disappear 4 days or weeks at a time. He simply replied, "Out there," when I asked him where he had gone. It occurred once more in June of 2011. One evening, from a payphone outside of Rollins, Wyoming, he called me. His voice was little and frightened. "Something's wrong with the car again," he replied. "A flat tire. It's unbelievable. It's the same dang area." In the middle of nothingness, he drifted off, but I was going to repair it. However, what? I inquired. For a long while, There was silence. Then I believed I saw her. He muttered. I sat up straight. Abby. She was standing, Dad. Just like before, he said at the fence line. The same hair and the same small blue shirt. She turned her head when I called out to her. My chest constricted. You're exhausted, Dad. You're noticing things. At that moment, he began to cry. Since the burial, I had not heard him weep. Son, I went over there, he said. However, she vanished as soon as I approached. My automobile won't start now. I assured him that I would drive there first thing in the morning, so he should stay put. Okay, he said. I never heard his voice again after that. The following day, they discovered the vehicle parked on Route 287's shoulder, not distant from a weathered barbed wire fence. The driver's door was open, the keys were still in the ignition, and he was nowhere to be found. He appeared to have wandered off into the desert, according to the local sheriff. After searching for miles, search teams discovered nothing but a plush dolphin that was half buried in the sand and an old children's toy. They referred to it as a coincidence. I didn't. It has been years since then. I now have a family of my own, a wife, 2 children, and a rain-proof home. However, I find myself traveling those same routes every summer when the heat makes the roadways glitter and the air gets dry. I tell my wife that my desire to visit the nation is a result of nostalgia. However, that is untrue. In all honesty, I keep trying to locate them, somewhere beyond the dust and the quiet. Dad, Abby, perhaps waiting at the fence. And occasionally, I believe I see them when the light is just right and the road becomes so quiet, I can hear my own heartbeat. A man on his knees next to a vehicle, with her hair blowing in the wind. A young girl was laughing, and I hear her voice once more, as quiet as it was the night before the collision. It's the world appears to be on fire. I had no idea that a Saturday night might permanently alter my life. I used to be obsessed with vehicles, engines, speed, and the scent of warm asphalt and burnt rubber. For me, it was everything. I'm Jaden Brooks, and when I was 19, I was one of those kids who thought anything could be fixed with a full tank and an empty highway. I grew up in Henderson, Nevada, which is close to Vegas, where the roads go on forever into the desert and the lights never go out. The sound of mufflers reverberated across the suburbs every Friday night. It was just us, the underground street scene, with no police or mayhem. It had nothing to do with being criminals. It has to do with feeling free and alive. Every weekend, we got together in the dilapidated parking lot of an abandoned J.C. Penney located off Route 93. We used to hang out there, just kids in their 20s, with tuned engines and more adrenaline than sense. No lights, no cameras. Trey Wilson was my best friend in the group. Trey was more than just a racer. He had an obsession, the type of person who would listen to vintage rock music while rebuilding an engine in his garage, 3 in the morning. He recently installed a twin-turbo kit, his midnight blue Mustang GT. It snarled like an untamed beast. He was radiant that evening. He clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Bro, I've been tuning this evening all week. Now she's purring like a fucking tiger. Tonight, I'm stealing Cole's money. Observe me." One of the older guys was Cole, one of our top racers, a former army member in his mid-30s. Even when it was motionless, the black Nissan 370Z he drove had a menacing appearance. "Are you sure about it, man?" Leaning on my dusty red Civic, I inquired. "Cole is not easily defeated." Trey grinned. "Yes, I don't either. It always began that way, boisterous, arrogant, and playful. Before long, there was a buzz of tension and engine revs as someone brought beer and someone else lit a cigarette. Luis, our de facto leader, turned on the portable radio at around 10:45. "Okay, boys, coming in hot." The location plummeted. "Tonight, we're heading out by Black Ridge Pass until we vacate the town. Keep your stupid lights down." All week, police have been poking around. Black Ridge Pass was a peaceful, level, and roughly 30-mile stretch of route. If you had the courage, You could reach 150 miles per hour on this type of road, cutting over the desert. We rolled out in a procession of headlights. The music was loud, the windows were closed, and the heat from the day persisted, giving the asphalt a shimmering, dense desert feel. Trey pulled up next to I was revving the Mustang while the turbo whistled. "You better keep your phone ready, Jay," he shouted over the commotion. "When I smoke him, I want a freaking video." I gave him a thumbs up and chuckled. "Don't wrap it around a pole before the finish line, dude." He smiled. "It won't occur." The stars were out by the time we arrived at Black Ridge. They were crisp and dense against the pitch black sky. A petrol station flickered faintly in the distance, but otherwise it was deserted. Waving his flashlight like a marshal, Luis leapt out after parking his Charger crosswise across his shoulder. "Okay, form a line. Trey and Cole first. The winner receives a cold one on me, $500 in cash, and bragging rights." Near the bridge that spanned the highway, the crowd assembled. An ideal vantage point. With my heart racing, I ascended as well. I could sense it even though I wasn't operating a vehicle. Cole's Nissan and Trey's Mustang were side by side. Both engines rumbled like confined thunder as they idled. Luis held out his flashlight. All set. The engines increased in volume. Set. The air in the desert held its breath. Proceed. They vanished when the light went out. Two metal and angry streaks ripping through the at night. The turbo scream echoed off the walls of the canyon, and I could hear it. The 370Z took off like a bullet, and Cole initially had the lead. However, Trey was catching up halfway down. "Holy hell, he's closing," he said, as his Mustang pulled hard, and the twin turbos whined in the sync. Beside me, someone shouted. They were now less than half a mile from the finish line, side by side. They flew beneath us, causing the bridge to tremble a little. It was ideal for a moment. Balance, control, and speed. After that, everything took a terrible turn. Suddenly, Trey's Mustang jolted to the side. Perhaps a blown tire, perhaps a gust. Nobody was aware. Cole's Nissan was severely clipped, causing both vehicles to spin. Someone yelled, "Jesus Christ!" Metal let out a cry. With horrifying force, the Mustang crashed into the railing on the right side and bounced off. Cole's vehicle crashed against the median wall after spinning twice. The sound reverberated like a gunshot. Because it was so violent, it seemed like a haze for the next few seconds. Silence, smoke, and the terrible stench of coolant and burned rubber. Everybody froze. Luis was the first to yell, "Go down there. Make a move." I leapt over the bridge and hit the ground hard, yet I hardly felt anything. My heart was pounding as I ran along the shoulder while holding a flashlight. Cole's Nissan was upright despite being damaged. From below, sparks hissed. He was alive, but he was screaming, hurting, and confused. He was yelling, "My leg," as he pounded his hand on the driving wheel. I can't move my leg. I looked across at Trey's Mustang. It was a bad dream. The front end was completely smashed. The windshield was cracked like a spiderweb, and steam hissed from the radiator. "Trey, hey." I yanked on the driver's side door and yelled. It was immobile, like paper. The metal was folded. Someone rushed up from behind. I believe it was Rico, one of the other guys, who was fierce. "Holy_dude, he's not moving." I struck the window with my elbow, causing the glass to break inward. I was assaulted by the fragrance, blood, metal, and fuel. I felt my stomach turn as my flashlight flickered over the seat. The seat belt was slicing over Trey's chest as he slouched sideways. His head and hands were limp. I froze. Rico murmured behind me, "Jay." It wasn't present. The world began to whirl. My chest became chilly. It sounded like someone had jammed sand into my ears. I stumbled backward and fell over the railing. The beam of my flashlight danced across the pavement as it plummeted. I tried not to throw up as I sat there trembling. I recalled the warm, dry desert wind gathering up and conveying the distant, faint sound of sirens. Louise was shouting commands at everyone. "Make a 911 call. Now raise the flares." Cole was still stuck and screaming in pain. A tire iron was being used by someone to force open his door. I simply sat there gazing at Trey's vehicle. The silence was filled with the hissing sound of metal. Everything descended into chaos when the police and ambulances arrived. Coolant and oil puddles reflected the flashing red and blue lights on the canyon sides. Beside me, a paramedic knelt. "Are you harmed, son?" I gave a headshake. "My pals are still there." They were moving quickly. They were removing the Mustang's roof in a matter of minutes. I was unable to view. I felt like something was being torn apart by every sound of the metal twisting. I was shown to an ambulance so I could sit down. My hands continued to tremble. Cole's leg was severely damaged as he was hauled out onto the roadway. His voice broke as he called out for Trey. The coroner's van then pulled up. An officer approached me while I was still sitting on the curb several hours later. He appeared worn out but compassionate. He said, "You Jaden Brooks. Yes, you had a close relationship with the victim." I looked at my sneakers and nodded. "Have you noticed what transpired?" I paused. Like the others, I could have lied, claimed to have seen nothing. What was the point, though? Trey had vanished. Yes, I whispered. They were in a race. Cole was ahead, but Trey was catching up. His vehicle then jolted. I'm not sure if it was a tire or something else. He first struck Cole, then the wall. All I know is that something was written in the officer's notepad. "Your statement will be required later. Go home, youngster, for now." It was almost dawn when I arrived home. My mother's eyes were red from concern as she sat on the couch. "What happened, Jaden? Why is the highway lined by police lights?" I was unable to respond. "He's gone," I replied, as I sat next to her. Her hand shot to her lips. "Trey." With tears in my eyes, I nodded. "He failed to make it." She gave me a strong hug, if she was worried that I would also vanish. I sold my Civic a week after I finished racing that night. The funds were used toward community college. In an effort to keep my head down, I started working part-time at a tire store. Every time I passed that section of highway, I would slow down not to look, but because I was no longer able to press the accelerator, occasionally I could hear motors roaring in the distance and perhaps other racers continuing the custom, and I would sense a chill in my stomach. I made an effort to move on, but I'm still troubled by one thing. Louise gave me a call a few weeks after the collision. "Hello, dude. Strange thing. Trey's Mustang was towed to the impound lot, correct? However, the police were unable to locate his head when they tried to inventory everything." I froze. "What do you mean that you were unable to locate?" "Dude, you're gone. They looked in the ditch, the highway, and the wreck. Nothing. They never recovered it, but they speculated that it might have been tossed somewhere they missed. Occasionally, when I travel by myself late I swear I see headlights behind me at night. A duo that remains just distant enough to be unnerving. Like Trey's Mustang. It has a blue hue. I won't stop to let them go. But there was nothing in the mirror. Just a deserted road leading into the dark. I make an effort not to worrying about it. Leading into the dark. I make an effort not to worrying about it. It wasn't until that evening that I started to believe in such things. I used to reject the idea of supernatural phenomena, government cover-ups, ghosts, and UFOs. I assumed that everyone was just attempting to make sense of the strange things that occur when the rules aren't followed. However, what transpired on County Road 86 that evening altered my perspective on everything. I'm Ryan Keller, and I have been working evenings at the Rusty Mule, a little dive pub in Mason Ridge, Kentucky, off the main road. You understand exactly what I mean if you've ever driven through this region of the nation. Beer signs with neon lights that flicker more than they light. Regulars who have been drinking there since before I was born, and a jukebox that still accepts quarters. I had no intention of making a living as a bartender. My desire of working in construction was kind of dashed by a busted shoulder sustained in an accident on the job site. The tips were decent, especially on Fridays when the factory workers arrived, and the mule worked steadily. It was one of those slow nights on Thursday, March 12, 2023. Rain had been intermittent since dusk, and most people had already left for home by the time final call came around. The proprietor, Sharon, leaned over the bar as I was wrapping up my counter wiping. despite the no smoking sign directly behind her. She lit another cigarette and inquired, "You closing up solo again tonight?" "Yeah," I replied as I arranged many cups. Jake cancelled once more, said that his child was ill. Every single week, that boy's child has been ill. Blowing smoke in the direction of the window, Sharon mumbled, "Do you want me to stay until you're finished?" "No, I'm okay. I've been through this before." Grinning, she reached for her purse and gave me a shoulder pat. "Avoid getting lost in the mist. It's thick outside tonight, according to the sugar weather report." I dismissed it with a joke, but wow, she was correct. Around 2:15 a.m., I went outside. The air appeared to be made of milk. It was just visible through the parking lot lights. The sole remaining vehicle was my old Chevy Malibu, which was sitting by itself. The coolness grabbed me as soon as I went outside. It was quiet, thick and wet. Not a cricket. Not a sound other than a steady tick of the illumination over the door. After throwing my bar rag in the back seat, I got in and turned on the engine. Before an old Johnny Cash song came on, the radio crackled to life, primarily with static. More for companionship than anything else, I declined it. About half of the 30-minute travel home was spent on meandering back roads that passed past farmland and forests. Just you, your headlights, and the darkness, no traffic, no street lights. It seemed different that night, even though I had done it hundreds of times. After 10 minutes or so, I became aware of how dense the fog was. I mean, I could hardly see my car's hood. It appeared as though I was pushing through a white wall, even on low beams. I tightened my grip on the wheel and slowed down to about 20 miles per hour. Then I noticed it. I initially assumed it was merely one of those warning signs that flashed a faint yellow blink off to the right side of the road. However, there was something off about it. My headlights weren't reflected by it. On its own, it was brilliant. The light remained there even after I drove an additional half mile. The same constant blinking, same distance. What the hell? Squinting through the windshield, I whispered. It was illogical. I should have passed it by now if it was stationary. It ought to have fallen behind if it was in motion. However, it simply remained by my side. That's when I started to feel a little uneasy. I reduced the speed. With the tires crunching on damp gravel, the Malibu slowed. However, that damn light also slowed. The same blink, the same distance. I muttered, "No way." I stopped heart-thudding entirely and leaned forward to look through the mist. Even the light, which was still blinking, froze. Same location. I estimated that it was 30 yards off the road. I couldn't see what was beyond it because it was so far into the trees. I just watched it blink for around 30 seconds, like clockwork, once every 2 seconds. It altered at that point. The light continued to blink. However, it began to glow like a candle that was getting more air. Every pulse grew louder, whiter, and more vibrant. No, not at all. I fumbled for the gear shift and told myself, "We're not doing this." When I discovered the engine wasn't operating, I was prepared to put the car in reverse and simply turn around. Frozen. The radio continued to buzz faintly, and the dash lights remained on, but the motor was completely silent. I hadn't even made contact with the key. What the hell? Nothing happened when I turned it. Not a single click. I gave it another go. Dead, panic swelling in my throat. I tried a third time, pressing harder. At that moment, my phone buzzed inside the cup holder before going completely black. Dead. At the bar, I had charged it. It was located at 80%. I could feel my heart hammering in my ears. Outside the automobile, the fog appeared to get thicker and press on the window. With every pulse, that blinking light flared up as if it were feeding on something invisible. It was now glowing brighter, nearly white. Then it traveled upward, not backward or forward. It ascended via. The fog moved slowly and smoothly until it reached the top of the trees. At that moment, a sound broke the stillness. A deep, continuous hum that seemed to be coming from inside my chest, rather than being mechanical. My entire body began to vibrate. Christ Jesus, I trembled as I whispered. The light burst into brightness after pulsating once and twice. I threw my arm over my eyes and shouted. The car's inside glowed like dawn. That electrifying glow blazed through every part of me. Nothing after that. Quiet. Shadows. The brightness was gone when I opened my eyes. Only the fog and my headlights' faint beams penetrating it. I sat there shaking and panting for what seemed like an eternity. I could feel my shirt clinging to my back. Then the radio crackled once more, almost as if nothing had happened. After sputtering, the engine restarted. I didn't consider it. I simply depressed the gas pedal. With white fingers gripping the wheel and my eyes darting to the mirrors every 2 seconds, I sped down the deserted road while my tires squealed. I continued until I noticed the gas station on Mason Ridge's edge, which had a faint orange glow. I pulled up, parked beneath the lights, and left the motor running. As I sat there, an elderly man was enjoying a cigarette while sitting on the sidewalk outdoors. Squinting through the smoke, he turned to face me. "You look like you just saw a ghost, son," he stated. I wiped the perspiration from my cheeks and swallowed hard. "Something like that," I whispered. He laughed and nodded in the direction of the mist behind me. "You been driving through the back road tonight?" "Yeah, County 86. The elderly man's grin dimmed. "Ought to stay off that road past midnight," he muttered. "Things out there don't like to be seen." I didn't respond, simply sat there gazing at the fog, which was still dimly illuminated by the streetlight as it crept along the highway. Since then, I've drove that road several times, but never at night. And each time a fog rolls in thick, as if it's still out, I can still see that faint yellow blink in my thoughts. There, waiting for someone else to come to a stop. I've always been restless, as if there's a wire in my chest that continues humming and prevents me from settling. I was born halfway out the door, according to a joke my mother liked to make. "Eli, you have the heart of a traveler." Giving me my lunch before school, she would warn. But one day, that same heart is going to get you in trouble. In retrospect, I believe she was correct. I'd already traveled across 3 states and worked at more jobs than I could remember by the time I was 20. Shifts in the warehouse, dishwashing, delivery jobs. Every location felt more like a stopover than a final destination. Perhaps that's why I'll never forget what happened that October in 1994. It was meant to be just another relocation, another journey between lives. But every time I close my eyes, I still remember that drive home. Returning home usually feels like a failure when you're young. For nearly 2 years, I'd been living in Raleigh, North Carolina, making ends meet as a mechanic's assistant while attempting to curb my alcohol consumption. It wasn't functioning. Carl, my roommate, had finally had enough. He threw my duffel bag on the couch. One evening, I had returned home late and smelled like fried food and whiskey. "Eli, I can't keep doing this, man," he uttered in a monotone. "You must leave," I whispered. "I'm looking for work." But we both knew it was a lie. He let out a sigh. "You're searching for," and I apologize, mostly because it was true. That hurt. When life cornered me, I did what I always did. I made preparations to return to my parents' house in Pine Hollow, a remote town around 4.5 hours west. After packing up my few belongings, and renting a U-Haul. Naturally, Mom was pleased. Less so, Dad. He had told me over the phone, sounding stiff like he was doing me a favor he didn't really want to do. "You can stay here till you get back on your feet." I assured myself that it would only last a few months at most. Before I left Raleigh, I made a few stops, bid farewell to several people at the Rusty Wrench Garage, had coffee with my friend Pete, and, most importantly, said goodbye to Lara. But she was my girlfriend. Perhaps the word girlfriend was too serious for our relationship. With her arms folded and her eyes swollen, she stood at her apartment door in her baggy sweater. "You really going?" "Lack a lot of I tried to sound nonchalant as I said, "choice," but my throat was constricted. She gave a head shake. "You could spend some time with me. Regain your footing. That is not something I can do to you. You're doing it already." After snapping, she became softer. "I simply don't want you to vanish once more." I kissed her forehead and leaned in. "I'll return. I swear." That was a lie, too, as we both knew. I was back on the road 3 hours later. Across the roadway, the late afternoon light was bleeding orange. The U-Haul's buzz was mesmerizing. That low mechanical drone that eventually penetrates your bones drove slowly and largely in the right lane. Highway 64 and Route 49 obscured the road markers, towns whose names sounded like dreams that were only partially recalled. I had been driving for about 4 hours by the time I reached the Greensboro suburbs. Between stations, the radio crackled, bits of country music and static. I recall thinking about how deserted the highway seemed. There were no billboards or streetlights, just that long black ribbon of asphalt cutting through the middle of nowhere. I once got a Coke and stretched my legs at a Texaco station, close to Eden Hill, when I paid. The cashier, a woman with dyed red hair and a cigarette tucked behind her ear, looked at me curiously. "Are you going west?" she inquired. "Yeah, Pine Hollow," she grinned. "Dust and unpleasant memories are the only things there." "My life story," I uttered. Her chuckle was sincere and hoarse. "Are you going to drive carefully?" After midnight, the mountain curves are encircled by dense fog. I didn't give it much thought at the moment, but I did not. The sun began to set behind the trees as I approached Ashborough. I got stuck in traffic at that point. Over the hill, a long snake of brake light stretched, pulsing crimson in the deepening darkness. I slapped the driving wheel and moaned. Excellent. Crawling through took over an hour. The majority of drivers, who were tapping their fingers, starting cigarettes, and even shouting into their cell phones, appeared to be as bored as I was. It was after 8 when things reopened. I could finally accelerate the U-Haul back to 60 miles per hour, and the road was clear and quiet. There were farmland and dense forests all around that long, level length of highway. Occasionally, my headlights would shine over a reflecting road sign like a ghost smile. I slightly rolled down the window to allow I was awakened by the chilly air. Just another hour, I reminded myself. After that, you're at home. However, your thoughts can occasionally become restless when things become too quiet. The tail lights in the distance signaled the beginning. 2. No, a loose convoy of 3 box trucks was front of me. Their backs were white, unmarked, and devoid of logos. They appeared to be moving vans, possibly rentals similar to mine. They were moving at a slower pace than me, maybe 45 tops. I murmured, "Come on, fellas," and tapped the steering wheel. I looked in the left lane. Clear. As I got ready to pass, I gave a signal. Then the lead truck struck hard. The lights are red, blazed so quickly that I unconsciously slammed on mine as well. My heart pounded in my throat as my tires squealed. What on earth? While the other truck veered to the left, mine stumbled in the direction of the shoulder. Then I noticed him. In the center of the road, a man was splayed out. Beside him, a motorbike helmet snapped. A few steps away, a tiny bike toppled over. He was pulling himself and creeping slowly toward the road's edge. Jesus, oh Jesus, the truck next to me didn't stop when it saw him, but the first one must have. He charged straight over the man who was crawling. The noise, God, that sound will always stick in my memory. There was a hollow thump and a muffled crunch beneath the tires. "No," I yelled. The U-Haul fish fled before I could restore control, barely making it out of my throat before I veered onto the gravel shoulder. After that, everything fell silent, as if the volume knob had been turned off. With my hands shaking on the wheel, I coasted to a stop about half a mile ahead. I breathed shallowly and quickly. My mind continued to attempt to piece together what I had just witnessed, but it was unsuccessful. I examined myself in the mirror. The trucks came to a halt, one across both at a sideways angle lanes. In the dark, hazard lights blink. With his phone in hand, the lead driver had exited, a diminutive figure pacing. The twisted shape was visible to me on the road. I sat still. Shall I return? Do I need to assist? What would I even do, though? I was 24, broke, and slightly inebriated from adrenaline. I had no idea what CPR was. I remembered what my mother had said. You will eventually run into problems because of your restless heart. I wanted to convince myself that turning around would simply make me freeze even more, that leaving things to the experts was preferable. However, I knew the truth in my heart. I was terrified and afraid. I put the truck back in gear and started driving after what seemed like an eternity. The remainder of that evening is a blur. The porch light was on when I eventually got into my folks' driveway at around 10 o'clock. Grinning, Mom emerged in her robe. "You made it, Eli." I mustered a smile in return. "Yeah, lengthy drive." With a coffee mug in hand, Dad opened the door behind her. "Run a truck. Okay, all right." They both appeared extremely joyful, as if my coming was more than just another relocation. I lacked the courage to destroy it. The sound of that man vanishing beneath those tires was still audible to me that night as I lay in my old room and gazed at the ceiling fan. I saw it again each time I blinked. 30 years have passed since that night, yet I still get that knot in my stomach every time I travel on a highway. I've discussed it precisely twice. I experienced survivor's guilt once with my wife Renee and once with a therapist. I had said, maybe. However, I didn't make it through anything. I merely observed. I sometimes picture the man's face when I'm awake. I see his family waiting at home, wondering why he never returned, even though I never truly witnessed it. I've searched for any information that could reveal his identity, including news articles and obituaries. However, the internet wasn't what it is now, and that section of the highway was in the middle of nowhere. The road buried another nameless tragedy. A few years ago, the dream began. In them, I'm traveling that same stretch in the U-Haul once more. The trip never ends this time, though. The trucks ahead of me stretch into the distance and become blurry. A person emerges from the shoulder as the air begins to hum. The same broken man is crawling, but he is no longer seeking assistance. He's gesturing toward me. I drove back via Eden Hill on a whim last fall while traveling to a job in Tennessee. My hands twisted the wheel before I knew what I was doing, even though I hadn't intended to. Weeds were growing through the pavement, and the Texaco had been boarded up. Compared to what I remembered, the ancient highway appeared tiny. As I got closer to the location, I slowed down. The road's curvature allowed me to identify the tree line. I briefly believed I had seen something. There was a tiny flash of light in the ditch that resembled a chrome reflection. However, it vanished when I blinked. "I'm sorry," I muttered as I sat there for a while with the motor running and the wind brushing across the side mirror. I had no idea with whom. Wind brushing across the side mirror. I had no idea with whom. I never imagined that a straightforward drive to see a loved one would turn into the most terrifying night of my life. I used to spend quiet time on that section of the highway, the kind of route where you may let your mind wander, roll down the windows, and enjoy the refreshing air. I had driven it hundreds of times without experiencing any problems. However, I feel as though I can still feel the impact every time I walk past that old mile marker. It was only a month ago. I had left a job that I was already beginning to dislike at around 12:20 in the AM, outside of Marion, Kentucky. I was employed in maintenance at a small distribution warehouse, a location that felt vacant all the time, but never really slept. Flickering fluorescent lights, incessant forklift hums, and supervisors who don't recognize your humanity are the kinds of jobs that gradually wear you down. Even though I was exhausted that evening, I had promised my girlfriend Lauren that I would visit. I really simply wanted to put things right, because we had been fighting a lot lately over my hours and how aloof I had become. She lived in a little rental home her aunt owned close to Benton, surrounded by gloomy country roads and farms, some 20 miles from my flat. I texted her before I left work, "I'm on my way." She answered almost immediately, "Maybe 25 men tops. Be careful when driving. Avoid going back to sleep." Funny, I recall responding while chuckling to myself, "I'll be alright." Bad radio and coffee. The last typical thing was that things took place that evening, just before crossing the county border. I made a stop at a 24-hour petrol station. This outdated yellow-lit quick market has a constant motor oil and burnt coffee stench. The long-haired, calm cashier had undoubtedly seen every type of person enter those doors at 1 in the morning. He hardly looked up from the TV behind the counter when I entered, but he nodded. As I dropped to 20, he said, "Just gas." "Yes," I yawned, attempting to reach Benton. "You going through County 12? He asked with a sly smile. "Yeah, why?" He gave a shrug. "Just keep an eye on your ass. Out there, people drive insanely. No cameras, no lighting, nothing at all." I laughed, assuming he was overstating things. "I'll keep that in mind." He gave me a final, somewhat serious glance. "Really? No. Lately, a lot of strange underscore has occurred along that area. Last week, my cousin struck something, claimed it wasn't a deer. Wasn't a deer." I raised an eyebrow and repeated. He just stared at me. "Man, just drive carefully." I dismissed it. Everyone in this area had a story about something that happened in the woods. It's a reality of Kentucky life. However, I do recall how, as I pulled out, his gaze lingered on my car as if he knew something that I did not. The drive started out smoothly. It was a clear night. There was nothing except a clear, deserted highway ahead, no fog, no rain. Every few miles, the old rock station on the radio slipped in and out of static. I went beyond the final row of residences. Then it was just me and County Road 12. Imagine 5 meters of twisting, 2-lane blacktop through woodlands if you've never been on it. It's so dense that it seems like you're traveling through a tunnel. There is nothing but darkness, no petrol stations, no street lights. To keep myself awake, I rolled down the window halfway. Even though the air was bitingly cold, I enjoyed it. Kept me focused. For a while, I was content as my ancient Honda filled the cabin, until I noticed headlights in front of me. Both lanes are blocked by 2 cars parked side by side. I initially assumed it was simply a few pals having fun. Occurs frequently. Late evenings, bored children, little communities. However, as I approached, I became aware of something strange. Both vehicles were traveling at a leisurely speed of about 25 miles per hour. I tried to give them a hint by flashing my high beams. "Nothing," I yelled. It was finally accomplished with a brief, courteous tap to allow me to pass. The driver in the left lane accelerated slightly and moved ahead of the other. "About damn time," I murmured as I rolled my eyes and hit the throttle. I waved briefly through the window as I went by. The generosity people show out of habit simply to be polite. However, I noticed something that made my stomach drop in my rearview mirror. Both vehicles decelerated, then one abruptly turned on its lights. I squinted and flipped at my mirror, assuming it was just a jackass attempting to play tricks on me. But I sensed it before I could even swear at them, and bam! My coffee flew across the dash when I felt a sharp jolt from behind. The automobile fishtailed a little when the steering wheel wrenched in my hands. "What the hell?" I gripped tightly and yelled. They had slammed me, and I could see the headlights getting closer. I hit the accelerator hard. The tires squealed and the engine screamed. They remained right on me, despite my best efforts to establish as much space between us as possible. This time, it was a harder hit. I smacked the headrest as my head snapped forward. I felt a wave of panic. It wasn't a dream. This was actually taking place. They had no intention of passing. I was being chased off the road by them. I reached for my phone and tried to dial 911 while veering a little. 911. What's your emergency? Someone's following me. I stumbled out. My automobile was just struck twice by them. I'm traveling eastward toward Benton on County 12. The operator spoke quickly yet calmly. Sir, stay on the line. Could you explain the cars? I looked in the mirror. One is a dark, possibly black truck. I believe the others are a silver sedan. They are directly behind me. Can you reach a brightly illuminated area? I yelled. There's nothing out here. Everything is in the woods. One more crash. The pickup struck me once more. As I struggled to maintain control, my tires squealed. The operator's voice became more acerbic. Continue driving straight ahead. Don't stop. Units are being sent your way. Do you see any indications? Mile markers. Breathless, I shouted. Please hurry. At mile marker 37. At that moment, the sedan accelerated next to me in the other lane, matching my speed. In the darkness, I could hardly see the driver's face, but what I could see didn't seem right. He didn't even give me a glance. He was grinning. He had a strange, crooked smile that suggested he was having fun. "Get the hell away from me," I yelled. I floored it, hoping I wouldn't lose traction or hit a deer, even if he couldn't hear me. In an attempt to push me off the road, the car swerved near. Just in time, I jerked my wheel. Glass broke into the air as the side mirror snapped completely off. Come on, I whispered as my heart raced. Suddenly, blue and red lights burst behind us. "Thank God," I exclaimed. One of the two cars turned into a dirt lane that I had not even noticed before, while the other immediately slowed down before peeling off into the darkness. As the police cruiser got closer, I slammed on the brakes, pulled to the shoulder, and leapt out while waving my arms. With his hand in his holster, the cop emerged and shone his flashlight at me. "Keep your hands visible to me, sir." "Them," I shouted. "I'm the one who called." They struck me. They attempted to push me off the road. He lowered the light a little while examining my broken tail lights and damaged back bumper. "You're fortunate that you didn't flip. Jesus Christ. Are you all right?" I responded, still trembling. "My neck is killing me. Leave this highway, please. Go back toward town with me. There, you may submit a report." Numbly, I nodded and returned to the car. My phone buzzed as I trailed him down the street. When Lauren called, I responded in a shaky voice. "Hey," I said. "Are you all right? You sound strange." I muttered. "I nearly died." "What?" "A few psychos drove me off the road." "Thank God." The police arrived. After a long period of silence, she whispered, "Baby, just come here. Please, tonight. I'll remain with you." I made my statement at the station. Deputy Ron Healy, the cop, was realistic but polite. "We'll search for them," he declared. "However, people can vanish quickly out here. No plate hits, no cameras, nothing." I nodded, anticipating that response. I mumbled, "They knew what they were doing." He nodded slowly. "You'd be shocked at the things people do for no apparent reason." I drove directly to Lawrence once I left. I had to turn my entire body to look around since my neck hurt so much. With tears in her eyes and bare feet in her hoodie, she greeted me in the driveway. "Look at your car, Jesus," she muttered. "I don't even care," I said. Simply said, "I'm happy I made it." She gave me an almost painful hug. She forced me to lie down on the couch inside, and I was able to breathe at last. I was left with a shivering fatigue that I was unable to shake once the adrenaline ran out. Sunlight streamed in the following morning, if nothing had happened. Dented and bruised, my automobile sat in front like a passive witness. We didn't say much as Lauren made the coffee. When I went to the body shop later, the mechanic whistled softly as he examined the damage. "They nailed it, damn it. Are you okay?" "Fortunately, they didn't strike your petrol tank. Might have caught fire." I looked at the bumper and nodded. "Do you think it was random?" He shrugged half-heartedly. "Maybe. However, there are instances when people actively seek for responses. All you have to do is honk and flash your lights." That resonated with me, since all I did was beep and horn, and someone decided it was worth trying to murder me over. 3 weeks have passed. Since then, I haven't drove that road. I take the longer, 30-minute journey every night, because it has houses and streetlights. Even though I can still feel the fear beneath my skin, Lauren now spends more time with me. Dreams of screeching tires. Lauren now spends more time with me. Dreams of screeching tires. Most likely be working behind a desk someplace chasing numbers rather than traveling the country, of rusting torv and full of instruments and unfulfilled ambitions. Sean, my older brother, was the gifted one. He was able to give the guitar a soulful sound. However, I was that summer. I was not meant to be traveling. Had things gone according to my plan, I would barely able to tune the blasted thing. When we were young, we both began taking music lessons in Jacksonville, Florida. Mom believed it would keep us out of trouble. Sean flourished. I didn't. It became clear by the time we started high school that I was supposed to be a manager rather than a player. By default, I was drawn along when Sean's band began to gain popularity. They needed someone to answer the phone, count the money, drive when everyone was too inebriated, and deal with club owners who pretended that paying a band constituted charity. That was me, Eli, the unseen one behind the curtain, preventing the dream from coming to an end. The Rusted Miles was performing surprisingly well throughout the South by 2003. Imagine classic rock with a twist of southern grit and blues. They were likened to Sky Nerd, which Sean wore as a badge of honor. Small pubs and county fairs dominated the first several years. However, we were at last making reservations for legitimate clubs in Georgia, Mississippi, and Louisiana by the summer of that year. People were arriving in large numbers. People were familiar with their tunes, and although the money wasn't very good, it was consistent enough for us to consider moving west. One late night in a Waffle House south of Mobile, Sean had the notion. I was seated across from him after a gig. His hair was covered in sweat. "Man," he murmured as he stirred his coffee, "we've killed the South. We require fresh blood. Do you think you could get us some performances in the West?" I grinned. "Like California." He smiled. "Why not? The big dudes play there." That became my work as a result. The West Coast run was reserved. I had to make cold calls and send emails for 2 months. Despite being overlooked by most areas, I was able to put together 6 performances that ranged from Arizona to Northern California. We were all surprised by how well the tour went. The crowds were boisterous, thanks to a few clips that were circulating on MySpace. Many actually learned the lyrics to the band songs. We were all feeling unstoppable, sleep-starved, and half-broke. Up until the final night, that is, early in August. It was a Friday. About an hour's drive from Bakersfield, we arrived in Clearbrook, a little Californian hamlet surrounded by a peaceful desert. Perhaps 15,000 people live there. The kind of town where the same 3 elderly men sat outside each gas station, chatting aimlessly. The Red Lantern was the venue of our last performance. It was situated close to an empty lot on the outskirts of town that appeared to have been neglected for many years. The sun was blazing white overhead when we arrived that afternoon. Even inside the van, you could smell the dust as heat shimmered off the road. From the rear seat, Sean leaned forward. "Damn," he murmured. "Are you certain this is the location? Appears to be dead." "Yes," I replied while displaying my phone's booking email. "Additionally, this is it. The crowd is better after dark, according to the proprietor. The other guys, including our drummer Ricky, our bassist Cole, and our rhythm guitarist Jess, complained but continued. We killed time in the afternoon. The waitress at a diner called Motti's Grill, a woman in her 60s with cigarette ash-colored hair, warned us not to drive on the back roads after dark. Sean questioned, "Why is that?" She shrugged. "There have been a few recent incidents in this area. People are being robbed along the highway. You'll better park somewhere lit." I recall how serious her eyes were when she said it, even though we laughed it off. Around 8 p.m., we arrived at the club and parked behind the structure. The back lot was unpaved, with a solitary flickering light above a dented metal door and gravel crunching beneath the tires. It was the only site available. Although it wasn't perfect, the interior was better than I had anticipated. A little stage with Christmas lights surrounding it, a long bar, and darkwood walls. Trent, the bearded sound technician, assisted us with setting. "Hiya. I take it you're the opener?" he inquired. "Yeah," I replied. "Miles is Rusted." "Excellent. Don't assume a sizable crowd. Even though it's Friday, people don't arrive until late." He was mistaken. The venue was full by 9:45. It turns out that earlier that week, one of our songs had been broadcast on a local rock station. The audience was excited. People went crazy as Sean took the stage and performed that first riff. It was the kind of night you dream about. Everything made sense. The connection, the energy, the sound. I recall watching people sing along to songs my brother had written in our parents' garage while resting on the wall next to the bar. I felt proud for a little while, forgetting about money and stress. The lads were radiant after the performance. Nearly all of our merchandise, including CDs, stickers, and t-shirts, was sold. Vince, the bar owner, seems impressed as well. He clapped me on the shoulder and gave me an envelope full of cash. "You boys killed it," he remarked. "Anytime you're back in town, you got a spot here." I thanked him, put the envelope in my jacket pocket, and promised the guys that I would hide it in the van before getting drinks with them. My first error was that the only sounds in the rear lot were the distant sound of laughter coming from the club and the buzz of a generator. A thin coating of dust swept across the ground as the arid air cooled. I recall the crunch of my boots and the subtle scent of dry grass and engine oil in the air. Our van was parked alone. In the wavering light, I froze as I reached for the passenger door. Something chilly pressed against my lower back. "Don't move," murmured a quiet, low voice behind me. It wasn't really loud. It was just solid, not even furious. "Hands that I can see." My breath caught. "Okay," I murmured, softly lifting my hand. "All right, dude, go slowly. You're dead if you turn around," he remarked. "Just give me what you got." I forcefully gulped. "You're after my wallet." I received the envelope. He cut me off. "In your jacket." I was frozen by that. How on earth was he aware of the envelope? My heart pounded in my throat. My voice trembled. "Look, dude, no difficulty is what I want. Don't shoot, please." "Okay." "Then follow my instructions." "Quieter now," he said. "Gently return it." Yes, I did. I nearly dropped it because my hands were shaking so much. I felt it slip from my grasp as I held it over my shoulder. Behind me, there was a pause and a slight exhalation that sounded like someone saying, "Yeah," under their breath. I heard a second set, I promise. There was a movement in footsteps on the gravel, but when I attempted to concentrate, nothing was audible. The man said, "Stay right there. Repeat until 200. I'll puncture your spine if you move before then." I gave a nod, unable to speak at all. His boots crunched and then faded as he left. I counted silently while keeping my gaze fixed on the van. 1 to 3 up to 200. Then, just to be safe, another 100. The lot was deserted when I eventually turned around. Shaking, I made my way back inside. My heart was pounding and my mouth was dry. I was originally noticed by Sean. "Hello, dude. How did you get there? Are you alright?" I was probably as pale as chalk. I told them everything. The money, the rifle, and the voice. Cole's curse was loud enough to draw attention from half the pub. "Jesus, dude," Ricky exclaimed. "Are you certain you didn't see his face?" I didn't dare look, but he was aware of the envelope. He was aware. Sean tightened his hands and turned to face the door. "Do you believe you were set up by someone here?" "I'm not sure, perhaps." However, the proprietor of the club appeared to be honest. We explained the situation to Vince. He initially believed it to be a cruel joke, but then he noticed that my palm was still trembling. He immediately contacted the police. Within 15 minutes, the officers arrived. There are 2 young men who appear to like to be somewhere else. I told them the same tale. "Have you noticed a car departing?" One of them inquired. "No. He may have had a partner. You mentioned." "I believe so. I heard something, but I'm not positive. They warned me not to hold out hope, took notes, and gave me a card. There have been a few stick-ups in this region recently. They hid from townspeople, according to one, as that waitress had warned us. It's likely that someone witnessed you taking the cash." Before dawn, we left Clearbrook by car. There was only the sound of tires on the roadway. No music or conversation. The desert went on forever in both directions. The horizon is flooded with orange light. Sean was the first to break the quiet. He said, "You did everything right, man." "Did I?" I inquired. "I am lost all of our hard-earned money." He gave a head shake. "We can replace you with money. We are unable to." I was still unable to get rid of the guilt. I continued playing it again. What would have happened if I had turned around, parked someplace else, or called for assistance? In actuality, though, I might have died if I had taken any different action. The band attempted to bounce back when we returned home, but something had changed. The momentum and the enthusiasm subsided. The corroded miles broke apart in less than a year. Sean continues to perform at small events around Jacksonville, but beyond the Red Lantern that evening, the dream came to an end. I'm still employed in the music industry, but it's now behind a desk at a management firm. I've witnessed scores of youthful bands come up. I've been a truck driver for about 15 years. It's not glamorous employment, but it keeps food on the table, pays the bills, and provides a strange kind of tranquility that can only be found on long, deserted highways. I'm Randy Cole, and I've driven more nights than I've slept in a real bed. I primarily transport stuff between Arizona and New Mexico, but occasionally I go as far as Texas when the compensation is favorable. I remember that night like it was yesterday, dude. Around 2:30 a.m. It was early summer, possibly late June, and I was traveling south over a lengthy stretch of Highway 191, leaving behind Lords Creek, a small town that closes at 9 o'clock and has a diesel and burnt dust odor. Refrigerated produce for a Tucson distribution location filled half of my trailer. It was simple, just lettuce and peppers, but I couldn't stop for very long because of the deadline. I had already driven for about 9 hours. Additionally, something felt heavier than normal that evening. It was more than simply exhaustion. It was the silence. That's what the desert does occasionally. The world seems to have been shut off since it is so quiet. When you roll down your window, you hear this deep, never-ending silence instead of crickets or the bustle of daily life. The only thing keeping me awake was a late-night talk show presenter babbling about UFO sightings in Roswell, so I had the radio on low. When I realized it, I was drinking warm coffee and my eyelids were getting heavy. The dim flash of headlights in my side mirror, I didn't give it much thought at first, occurs frequently. There could be a car driving by, another truck, or someone behind you. However, I became aware that this car wasn't passing after a few miles. The distance wasn't even getting any closer. It simply remained in the same location behind me, keeping pace with me. "All right, buddy," I whispered to myself. "What's your deal?" After 5 more minutes, I let off the throttle to see if they would catch up to me. They didn't. I accelerated once more. They also did. My stomach constricted. You don't see many folks out here on a deserted highway like that. The majority of people know better than to drive this late, unless absolutely necessary. So whoever was back there, either they were seeking trouble or they had business. I radioed over CB about 15 minutes later, just in case. "Breaker 1N, has anyone seen a dark SUV driving south on 191 close to mile marker 88? It appears to be a tinted black or navy Tahoe." Nobody responded. Not a single soul. The hush became genuine at that point. I attempted to brush it off. I convinced myself that it was just a scared visitor who was terrified to walk past a large rig in the dark. However, that identical SUV was still there after over 30 miles. I was always far enough behind to be unable to see the driver. You learn to trust your instincts once you've been in trucking long enough. Something wasn't right. My instinct told me. 3:05 a.m. for one of those dirt pull-offs near the highway, an ancient rest area that had restrooms and vending machines before the state ceased to maintain them, the kind that consists only of a rusting bench, a metal garbage can, and cracked pavement. "All right, I'll pull in," I thought. "Allow them to go. It's that easy." I turned off into the lot after slowing down and turning on my blinkers. The SUV's headlights briefly remained steady in my mirrors before transforming into my heart. Sank. They parked across the lot, about 50 yards away, and sat there with their lights off and their engine running. I'm not a hothead by nature, but I've dealt with weirdos before, attempting to steal fuel, interfere with truck drivers, or worse. "All right, you want to play games," I muttered as I grabbed my flashlight and got out of the cab. "Let's find out what the hell is wrong with you." As I crossed the lot, the gravel crunched beneath my boots. Little clouds were created in the air by my breath. It had quickly become cold. Above the vending machine, there was simply a buzzing light bulb that flickered as if it was unsure of whether to survive. The SUV roared to life before I could reach halfway to it. It rocketed rearward in reverse, spun gravel, tore out into the highway, and vanished into the night as the headlights came on. I watched the red tail lights fade till they vanished as I stood there with my mouth hanging wide. What in the actual hell? With my heart still racing, I mumbled. I lingered there for a time, just taking in the hum of the desert. Then I chuckled to myself and shook my head. Cole, you're going crazy. It's going to your head, damn dessert. I went empty-handed to the vending machines. Not a single snack or beverage within numbers. Nevertheless, I thought I deserved a vacation. I wasn't in the mood to continue driving after that foolishness. I took a stroll, examined my tires, cargo seals, and locks before getting back into my cab, reclining the seat, leaving the window slightly open, and closing my eyes. I promised myself that I would relax for no more than an hour. Upon awakening, the first thing the sound was heard. It's just wrong, not loud. There was a slight crunching sound, the gravel moving like cautious, unhurried footsteps. My heart began to race as soon as I opened my eyes. I remained motionless for a few seconds. All I did was listen. Once more, there it was. Crunch, crunch, crunch. There was a person outside. I silently reached up and opened one corner of the drape until it cracked. The night air was calm, but I noticed movement close to the back of my trailer. With their headlamps off, two people were crouching close to the doors of my trailer. One of them was playing around with the latch. The other had a little object in it, possibly a bolt cutter or crowbar. My throat became parched. They were robbers, thieves of cargo, in the midst of nowhere, out here. I remained motionless, my heart pounding so intensely that I could feel it in my neck. Then I heard the sound of a lock being tested, a gentle metallic clink. That was sufficient. I slammed my hand on the air horn without thinking. Like a bomb, the explosion reverberated throughout the desert. The two men leapt as if they had been electrocuted. One fell, whatever instrument he was using. They ran into the darkness and headed for the scrub brush near the lot's edge. That's when I noticed it. Lights on the head. Once more, that fucking SUV raced down the highway. The tires spew gravel, the engine roars, and the lights are off. After slowing down long enough for the two men to jump inside, it shot off once more and disappeared into the darkness. Everything took place in less than 30 seconds. I sat there breathing hard, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. My hands were shaking, fumbled for my phone, and dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? This is Randy Cole. I'm a truck driver parked off Highway 191 near mile marker 91. Two males just tried breaking into my trailer. They took off in a black SUV, maybe a Tahoe or Suburban. The dispatcher kept her voice calm. Are you injured, sir? No, but they were right at my rig. They had tools. I got them on the horn before they could open it. Stay in your cab. Make sure the doors are locked. The officers are on their manor, despite her inability to see me. I nodded. Yes, I'm not leaving. It took nearly 40 minutes for the sheriff's unit to arrive. Two deputies, one older guy with a mustache, the other youthful, barely out of academy. Their cruiser headlights lighted up the lot like it was noon. I climbed out once they gave the all clear. The older one, Deputy Harland, took me to the back of the trailer. Looks like you scared them off just in time, he said, running a flashlight along the latch. Fresh Primarks here. They didn't get through, but they were trying. Any idea who they are? I inquired. He let out a sigh. We've had reports along this stretch for months now. They target truckers parked alone in pull-offs like this, usually 2 or 3 men, black SUV or pickup. They scout routes during the day and hit them at night. So, they'd been following me all that time. Wouldn't surprise me. They wait till you stop somewhere quiet. You leave your cab unlocked or they catch you asleep. They can strip a load in under 5 minutes. The younger deputy walked around checking tracks in the dirt. Tire prints match other scenes we've seen, he said quietly. They know the back roads. Harland looked back at me. You did the proper thing hitting the horn. Probably saved your load and maybe your life. I nodded, scratching the back of my neck. Didn't feel brave at the time. He grinned slightly. Brave's typically what you call dumb in hindsight. Tonight it worked in your advantage. They took my statement, verified my ID, and left after about an hour. Then, too exhausted to drive, but too wired to sleep, I sat back in my taxi. I couldn't stop thinking about those two shadows crouched by my wheels, their movements quiet and deliberate, their breath fogging in the chilly air. I was still thinking about that SUV. It simply knew when to appear, and it moved without lights. I didn't stop for the remainder of that haul. I continued driving until dawn. A few days later, I was back at a truck stop outside of Tucson, drinking burnt coffee and discussing the incident with Jimmy Lee, another driver. His eyes widened when I told him, "Oh my God, you encountered the ghost runners." "What?" He tapped his cup while reclining in his chair. "That's what some of the boys call them. Group of thieves been working that desert line 4 years. Nobody ever catches them. Cops find tire marks, footprints, but no faces. Couple of rigs disappeared completely. Some folks say they're ex-military. Others believe they're part of a bigger ring, like cartel runners or whatever." I gave a head shake. "Ghosts or not, they were damn real." Jimmy grinned. "Alb, ghosts or not, they were damn real." Jimmy grinned. "Alb,